Joining me now is a lawmaker at the intersection of both of these stories and major issues, Democratic Congressman from Texas, Colin Allred. He also serves on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. We really appreciate your time. And I want to start with voting rights and the Texas Democrats who've come to Washington to try and prevent this bill from passage. I understand that they can delay it for quite some time, but at the end of the day, do you think that they can prevent this from becoming law in Texas?
Well, I think what they've done is shone a light on what they're trying to do in Texas. And, they're trying to do this the first time, Casey, over a holiday weekend in the middle of the night without really any public insight into what was happening. And they certainly have changed that dynamic. Now the eyes of the country are on what's happening in Texas. And I think that was the first and most important step. Now, whether or not they're going to be able to prevent this from, eventually passing with the governor being able to call repeated special sessions, I don't know. But I think they've certainly highlighted what we need to do in Congress, which is to pass federal protections for the right to vote.
So it's pretty clear that the For the People Act it goes too far, even for many Democrats, like Joe Manchin. But Manchin has said he supports things like the John Lewis Act. But that one's not written yet, I'm told, by Democrats on Capitol Hill. And that's frustrated people like Joe Manchin. Do you know what the holdup is in the House writing and passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act?
Well, I think Senator Manchin has laid out some things that he would support. And, the kind of the list that he put out there, I think is one that we should adopt and that we should put into legislation as quickly as possible. But when it comes to H.R. 4, the Restoring the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, we're going to move quickly on that. And I've actually been in discussions in the last few days about how we can move up that timetable. We're trying to make sure that we have the right evidentiary record to make it as bulletproof as possible, knowing that it's going to be challenged in the Supreme Court. But I think the time certainly to act is now. We know that redistricting data is, for example, is going to be going out very soon, and it'd be good to have the Voting Rights Act back in place before those districts are drawn. And there are a lot of other things, of course, the Voting Rights Act could prevent from happening. Bills like what's happening in Texas, if we had pre-clearance, it'd have to be cleared by the Department of Justice first. So I think we need to move quickly. And this is something I've been pushing for, and I'm going to continue to push for, because I know how important it is for Texas and for a lot of states, especially in the South.
How quickly do you think you could move on it, considering that there is a jam-packed schedule of other things?
Well, we passed it in the last Congress, and so this is something that needs to be updated. And there are some changes now after the Supreme Court's recent ruling in the Arizona case that I think have to be put in to clarify the will of Congress, because in that case, they did do some interpretation of the will of Congress that I think is not consistent with what we wanted. So there have to be some changes, but we did pass it in the last Congress. The structure is there, and so it shouldn't be too difficult. I think now we just have to get moving on it. And you're right, we do have a packed schedule, but there's nothing more important than our democracy. And I think everybody understands that.
So let's talk about the rest of the calendar, because, of course, we've been following this news, the president meeting now with your Senate colleagues about the human infrastructure plan. It's a big number, $3.5 trillion. And obviously, there are a lot of progressive priorities in the bill. Elizabeth Warren spoke to my colleague Garrett Haake and said that she is basically happy with the number, even though she may want to push for more, that it's a strong start. It raises some questions about more moderate Democrats, particularly in swing districts, even in the House, where there's a lot of nervousness about raising taxes this much. How concerned are you about getting a massive package like this through the House of Representatives, even after if it does get through the Senate?
We have to recognize that the need is enormous too, Casey. And I think that's where we're starting. Instead of looking at the top line number, we have to look at the components of what's in the package and why it's in there. Because when you're talking about infrastructure, we know that nationally we have a C- in terms of our physical infrastructure from all the experts who've looked at it. We're the richest country in the world with the 13th ranked infrastructure. So we need to invest in the hard side of our infrastructure. But if the last 15, 16 months have taught us anything, I think it's that it's been an extremely difficult time for American families, that we need to expand the child tax credit as we've already done and make that permanent, that we need to do something about housing. And then particularly for child care, as somebody who has 2 young children, I can say this, paid family leave, pre-K, access to child care. I mean, these are things that American people have been crying out for so long, and that will have enormous economic impact. So the cost of it is one thing, but the impact and the benefits, I think, are going to far outweigh that. And so I'm confident that we'll have the votes in the House. There's going to be wrangling and there's going to be, back and forth. That's how it works. But we understand that the need is enormous. It's been an extremely tough year and a half. We're coming off of a very dark 4 years before that. And we've had some of these needs for a long time. They've been put off and really in some cases since the Eisenhower administration that we haven't addressed some of these things.
How did the latest inflation numbers that show prices going up for all kinds of goods and services affect the conversation around this bill among your colleagues in the House?
Well, I think we have to keep an eye on it, but we also have to recognize that in the last 5 months, we've created 3 million jobs. We're seeing economic growth projections that are going up, unemployment going down, and wages, importantly, going up as well when you're talking about inflation. So we're going to have to keep an eye on it. And I think it's something that we have to be aware of. But turning on the economy after a crisis like what we just went through just isn't as simple as turning on a light switch. There are going to be, hurdles that to overcome on your way back to recovery. And I think this is one of them.